Okay, I'm just checking that this is recording. It seems to be fine. Today's video is about human relationships and fixed costs. The reason I'm talking about fixed costs and human relationships or family relationships today is because this week I've been consulted about both, and suddenly it's very clear to me that there are parallels. Well, let's kind of wind the clock back slightly and we'll look at what are fixed costs and define them, and also what are family relationships. Let's have a look at those as well, and then I'll try and put them together and you'll see how they relate one to another. Now, if you were thinking of starting a small family business, say a shop selling clothing in the high street, which would be quite an expensive place to open a shop these days, but nevertheless, let's imagine that you were going to do this. First of all, you would have to take the lease on a shop over a fixed period of time. If there were any debts owing on the lease due to the other people that had occupied it, you may have to take on those debts as well and clear them in order to gain your lease. And then if you're going to employ any staff, you've got the fixed cost of wages. You've also got to buy stock, and if you haven't got the money yourself in order to buy the stock, you might take a loan out from the bank that would, if you could persuade them that you're a good investment, in which case you would have to pay fixed term interest on that. And then you've got things like local taxes, depending upon where you're located, which country you're in, and so on and so forth. You will know what those are. You'll also need to employ an accountant probably to submit your books to the government. You may need a cell phone or a regular telephone in order to connect to the internet, in order to order things. All these things have to be paid for, and they are all paid for regardless of whether you sell one item or a million items from your business. These things are called fixed costs, and unless you can actually meet the cost of your fixed costs, you're going to rapidly go bankrupt. And so there are formulae which can be applied, which will enable you to calculate what's called a break-even point. The break-even point is the point at which you've created sufficient sales in order to meet your fixed costs, and then you will be going into profit with every further sale that you make. Now, with the advent of the internet, of course, people say things like, well, I do all my work online, so I don't have any fixed costs. But that's unlikely to be the case, because you're still going to be taking up space in your house where you place your laptop or wherever. You're still likely to have to employ an accountant. You're still going to have to pay yourself something so that you can eat, unless you're going to be supported by somebody else in the family. You're likely to use a telephone from time to time. There are going to be a myriad of things that are kind of like hidden costs to your business. And of course, you're also going to have to pay tax, and that tax itself is in itself a hidden cost, if you like. It's a liability. I know that people who are not in business also pay tax on their earnings, but nevertheless, that's a liability for them as well. So there are fixed liabilities to businesses and digital businesses just as much as any other business. When people get married, usually they do so in Western society because of what's called a love match. And many, many years ago, I attended a lecture by a psychiatrist his name was Dr. Percy Gumbrill, and he presented a very fascinating talk about the state of being in love. Because what he said was that when we fall in love with somebody, all of our primary defense mechanisms are activated. Now, that doesn't mean that we're frightened of the person that we're in love with, far from it. Although we can be a little frightened, we can be a little timid when approaching a potential partner and not really sure whether or not we'll be rejected or not. However, defense mechanisms really are distortions in the way in which we view the world or something within the world. So they're a kind of neurosis or even a psychosis in some instances. It's not that the walls start to crowd in on us, or we hear voices coming out of the radiator, or that kind of thing. But it's simply that we see this other person, but we don't see them accurately. We see in them all the attributes that we feel that we lack. And of course, we are magnetically attracted because we think that we can somehow or other learn from them and correct our inadequacies. We fail to see all the foibles that they may have, and as a result, we just think that they're absolutely perfect. And as if all of that were not enough, we are so attracted to them that we forget our own personal liabilities in certain circumstances, and we do things like buy expensive gifts and engagement rings and God knows what else, and saddle ourselves with a lot of debt simply to prove to the rest of the world that we have found the right person. Unfortunately, unlike in fairy stories, the whole thing doesn't end there, because once we're married, we have to discover who our partner really, really is. Now, over time, what tends to happen is the defense mechanisms begin to fall away, and we discover our partner maybe they're an excellent cook, but they're not very good at timekeeping. Or maybe we discover that whilst they were absolutely fixated upon us during courtship, they're now morbidly addicted to their work. Or maybe their circumstances changed in some way. Maybe they were happy in a low-pressure job somewhere and they got promoted into a high-pressure job and now they're absent a great deal. Or possibly we find that we have children on our hands and our child rearing styles are really very different because our families of origin were very, very different in terms of their family culture. So what's this got to do with fixed costs in business? Well, quite clearly, just as when calculating fixed costs in business, we have to be very sure what the break-even point is before we even embark upon the business to ensure that, in fact, there's a chance that we may make a profit. So in a relationship, we need to be pretty sure that we have similar values to our partner, because after the marriage has taken place and as time passed, the scales, the lenses that have distorted our perception during the courtship period are going to fall away, and we're going to find the person that we're really married to. We're really going to understand our spouse, and the fixed costs of such a spouse are that we have to accept many, many of their foibles. All the time when I was a family therapist, people would come to me with a story of how they actually saw potential difficulties with a partner, before a marriage took place, before they were committed. However, they were under the impression that they could change their partner once they were married. And I have to tell you, this actually very rarely happens. In fact, when it's attempted, quite frequently it just leads to resentment and arguments. If that's the case, is there any hope for a marriage in which there are two imperfect human beings? And of course, there is, because to some extent, we are all imperfect human beings, and yet there are lots and lots of successful marriages. And the secret of the longevity of such marriages is that people have come to, first of all, accept they have similar values, they stand for similar things in life, yet they also accept the fixed costs or the imperfections of their partners. And the break-even point is when the number of imperfections can be exceeded by the benefits of being together. There is really a very, very clear relationship between what it means to have fixed costs in a relationship and what it means to have fixed costs in a business. There's also going to be a trade-off in family businesses in terms of time between the amount of time you spend within the business and the amount of time you spend doing domestic things, which should be much more light-hearted. One difficulty that sometimes happens within a family business is the business actually is all pervading. The people get up talking about business. After they've cleaned their teeth, they have breakfast and they talk about business. They then go to their business together where they do their business. And then one of them goes home in order to prepare the tea, and the other one comes back and talks about what happened in the business. Then they wash up, they'll do the washing up, tidy up together, talking about the business. Then they collapse on the sofa for a couple of hours, perhaps trying to escape from the business. They fall asleep, dreaming about the business, and the next morning, the first thing they talk about is the business. This, of course, is not a natural way of living, and it's unsustainable over a period of time. Anyway, I'm getting on to another story now. What I really wanted to do was to just point out that in every business there are fixed costs, and in every relationship there are fixed costs as well. And you may not like it, but you just got to live with it. And so, until tomorrow, goodbye.
If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to share your thoughts with other family business owners in the comments section below. You can also respond to thoughts posted by other viewers. Remember to like and share the video and subscribe to this channel. To be sure to receive notifications, you must also click the bell icon at the top right-hand corner of the YouTube page.